Well, welcome everyone to the Be Awesome Network. I'm Lori, and I'm so excited to bring Mary Ellen Miller to you today. Mary Ellen, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, Lori. I am. And I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone tonight.
Absolutely. Well, I'm super excited because we just had a chat about a very important topic and something that you kind of discovered along your journey, and you were looking for help and couldn't find it. So you ended up writing a book about it. So why don't you tell us, where in the world are you coming to us from, and what is your book about? What are you passionate about?
Surely. Thank you. Well, I'm coming from the Northeast Pennsylvania mountains in the Poconos, and we're like in a tundra situation up here probably for the past 6 weeks. So, what my passion, I'm a public health nurse by background. So, my passion is really the health of communities, individuals, families, and communities, because communities can only be as healthy as the individuals and families who reside and work in there situation, lends them to be. But you asked about my book and how I got to my space. My book's a story about part of my life, a recent part of my life. It's nonfiction, and it's called Secret Sorrow, Grieving and Healing as a Non-Grandparent in a Grandparenting World. And I express in the book what a non-grandparent is, my belief of what a non-grandparent is, and the different types of non-grandparents there are, because there are various types. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of a category. So it's my feeling that a non-grandparent is someone who is an adult who really desires and has that yearning to be a grandparent. And it's the yearning for that connection, to be able to share, time and energy and space, but also to impart values and spirituality and things of that nature to a grandchild. And so when you don't have that opportunity from the various reasons that I discuss in the book, which I'll talk about tonight, um, you can experience profound sadness. You can experience feelings of grief and loss. And I kept those feelings that I had to myself for a really long period of time. My journey began when my daughter and son-in-law, after infertility treatments, announced that they were pregnant, and we were all so excited, over the moon. And then, unfortunately, towards the end of the first trimester, she experienced a pregnancy loss, and everybody was just taken down this deep path that, we all weren't prepared for. So I didn't want to relay to anyone, even my own husband, like how sad I was about the experience. I wanted to be there to support them, to give them, someone to lean on and to be there for them. And then as time went by and things got back to normal, whatever that means, um, I started feeling better. Like I felt like I was getting back on a normal pattern of trajectory. I was still working full time. But then every now and then, and it was getting like more frequent, a friend or a family member would let me know that their son or daughter was going to have a grandchild, going to have a baby, and they would be a grandparent, or maybe it would even be a subsequent grandchild. And then the feelings of sadness and loss would like come back to the surface. So I decided, well, maybe there's a book out there somewhere that I can pick up and give me some coping strategies, help me through this journey. And I went online and I went to my local Barnes and Noble, and I couldn't find, you can find loss and grief books on so many topics, thankfully. Loss of a pet, loss of a job, so many different topics. But for my particular topic of someone who is anticipating being a grandparent and having that role in their life, and then to have that not happen, I couldn't find anything. So then I started to think, well, maybe I should write this book and talk about strategies that I learned, like how to cope and communication strategies, self-care strategies. My last chapter is all about self-care. But then, like I said, I was working full time and life got in the way and things happened, and it wasn't coming to fruition. But I did manage to have some articles, three actually published. Two were in Loss and Grief online journals, Still Standing magazine, and the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper published an editorial that I wrote. And also, and I don't know why I'm Digest. I'm like, why am I blanking on that? Digest. was another loss and grief online resource. So what was really validating for me was at the end of these articles, you give your email address and it says like contact me if you have questions or comments. And I heard from so many people about not just thanking me for bringing this topic to the surface, but for validating their feelings to make them feel like they weren't alone. And I even heard from a handful of people from the UK. And so it really made me realize that this isn't just something that's happening here, in Pennsylvania or in the United States. Like it's a global phenomenon for people of a certain age that really desire to be a grandparent, and that milestone is elusive. So, so that's like the nutshell of how I got to write the book.
Yeah, and that is such an important topic because it seems like that, that when you get to the point of life where you've got children and they are, starting to want to have children, it's something that you look forward to as, as you go through life. And so it's something that you are anticipating, and when it doesn't happen, there's such disappointment. And I think you talked about how when you're you had friends who were having grandkids, and then you had to kind of relive that pain all over again. So it's so important. And talk about maybe what you went through in your heart, and how you kind of recovered.
Well, that's a really good place to explore, Lori, because um, one thing that I did do that was not helpful was I kept my feelings to myself for the longest time. Like not even my husband knew, how, the depth of my emotion. My son-in-law and daughter, I felt they needed my help afterwards. They needed somebody to be there for them, a shoulder to lean on, and my daughter and I have a very close relationship. So, in the initial days and weeks, like I was one of her, she has her friends too, but I was one of her support people. And I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be, for their journey and their pathway to healing. But actually, I did myself more harm than good because as time went on, like I said, I started feeling like I was getting back to myself. But then when people were making their pregnancy announcements or after the babies were born, and you got to see all these beautiful, beautiful pictures on social media, then the feelings would resurface. And, she was doing the winter, she lost her pregnancy in the summertime, she was doing the winter time. So, then those particular times of year became, difficult. And I point out in the book that I really should have sought help of the grief counselor or a therapist because I think my healing would have been much quicker or much smoother for me. So I encourage people to do that. And then the other thing that was part of my journey was I too had actually two pregnancy losses. And before I had my two daughters, so all those old feelings, I think, they magnified, the situation. Like nobody knows how anybody feels, no matter what their situation is that they're going through, even if you've had, you lost your job and now your best friend lost their job. You have no idea what exactly they're feeling, but you can empathize a little bit because you've been down that same path. So I made it clear to her that, and she knew my stories of my pregnancies. Um, but I made it clear to both of them that I really didn't know their feelings, but I wanted to be there for them to support them. But
Yeah.
but I initially was looking through the non-grandparent lens through my experience. When I wrote my articles, I was talking about myself. I was talking about infertility issues that happen that people then are not grandparents, or pregnancy losses. Now, ours was in the first trimester, but people can have a pregnancy loss later in pregnancy. There are fewer, like 20% of all pregnancies that are lost are in the first trimester. And the number could even be higher because people could be pregnant and not even know it and just have a late period and actually be having a loss. But in the latter pregnancy, like 13 to 19 weeks, you can have second trimester pregnancy losses, and they account, depending on where you read, 1% to 5% of pregnancy losses. And then sadly, after that, babies who are born still, um, 21,000 babies in the United States every year are born still. So, and there's really a wide range of causes in terms of, is it a placental problem? Is it a genetic problem? But a lot of those, sadly, have never with a confirmed reason, like after a stillbirth. A lot of families have no idea then moving forward, like what caused the pregnancy to end like that. So when I wrote the book, I layered it. I put different categories of non-grandparents, like the childbearing grandparents that I just talked about. Sudden infant death syndrome falls in that category. Neonatal death, which is death in the first 28 days of life, which is an experience I had when our first baby, 8 days old, passed from prematurity. So that's considered neonatal death. So there's so many different categories in a childbearing realm. But then in a non-childbearing realm, a big phenomenon currently is that many young adults are considering not having children, either postponing having children or deciding, making a conscious decision not to have children. And as much as the person in my shoes who wants to be a grandparent really wants to have that in their life, I point out in the book how you have to honor your adult children's decisions. And if that's their life choice, you know, trying to change their mind or trying to influence that is really not the right approach. And the New York Times wrote an article in late November, and that's who they interviewed. They interviewed, I believe it was 5 or 6 adults who are non-grandparents, and the reasons why for they were all related to adult children who desired not to have children. Um, but in the comment section, the feedback was so mixed. I mean, there were people who wrote that, they understood the pain of the non-grandparent and that should be respected, and that I believe that too. But then other people wrote, especially I believe they were younger people, saying, I told my mom and dad I'm not having kids, and they won't leave me alone about it. They keep hounding me. It's to the point where I don't even want to visit them anymore. There's such a big family dynamic going on with that. So I think, and I pointed out that if you are in that position where your adult child is either postponing indefinitely or not going to have children, you have to find a close family member or a close friend or a therapist, like to talk about your feelings, but not to be putting all your feelings onto this adult child who's made that very hard and deliberate decision not to have a child. Um, and then there's other categories too, like there's a transgender population in our nation who are exploring their sexual identity. So I don't have statistics for that. I looked for that, but the Williams Institute in California publishes a lot of information on transgender. Um, so your child may be exploring their sexuality, or they might be in a same-sex relationship where, even though nowadays it's more mainstream for people to have children if in a committed relationship that's same sex, but some don't, some elect not to, just because they know how complex then the life might be for the child when the child is growing up, or other reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then there's another category too of estrangement in families where you have grandchildren, but you're never allowed to be with them or interact with them or see them because there's something that happened, within the family. And so those grandparents, in my view, are non-grandparents because they're not given the opportunity to interact. Um, I didn't mention that not only my story is in the book, but I have 8 other persons' stories, very brief narratives. They're not chapters, but they're interwoven within chapters about their experiences of being a non-grandparent. And one of them is a good friend of mine from nursing school that I've known for 50 years. But until I was writing this book and reached out to see like if people would like to contribute, I never knew her feelings. She has a second marriage, and her husband has children, adult children with children. So she says, like, technically, I'm a grandmother, but I don't want to usurp or overstep the boundaries of their biological grandmother. So she said, I kind of always like hold back, and I don't really have the same degree of interaction and the same degree of emotional investment in those grandchildren because they're technically my husband's and not they're mine through marriage. So I think that's another family dynamic that sometimes really can be very difficult for people going through that.
Yeah, so many dynamics to consider. And do you know much? Maybe you don't, but I'm curious, when did non-grandparent become a term to describe kind of the population you're talking about?
Well, all I can say is when I wrote my loss and grief articles, and I was writing them in 2018, and they were published in 2019. And that term, I'd never found that term anywhere in the literature. So I wrote that one, used that term and defined it as someone who wants to be emotionally invested with a grandchild, but to whom the life milestone is elusive. And that's in my articles. So it has been used after that, but I've never gotten credit for it or whatever. But with my book, though, it's in the title of my book, Grieving and Healing as a Non-Grandparent in a Grandparenting World, because we certainly do live in a grandparenting world.
Yeah.
And the older you get, like myself, the more, your friends and family members are grandparents. So
Yeah.
you're surrounded everywhere.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's kind of like maybe when you go through other milestones in life and you're kind of the odd man out
Mm.
and you're not married yet, or you're not having kids, or you can't have kids, or something like that, and you feel so alone. So I'm thankful that you were able to do the work you did and do the healing you did so that you can help other people heal.
Oh, I appreciate that. I really do. And I do have chapters in the book that are on just general, like loss and grief in general, all the different theories of grief, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, um, from the initial workings that she did back in the 60s. And then others like William Worden. There's others that are in the book. And then just like a chapter on the differences between mourning and grief and bereavement, because people sometimes use those terms interchangeably, and they're really three separate categories. Tips for families and friends to help, like how can you help someone navigate their grief? And then also for the non-grandparent, just day-to-day things like that um, just what worked for me, so like receiving now, a lot of things are online, but in the mail, like receiving invitations to baby showers, and, to let yourself feel comfortable, like turning it down if it's not a good spot for you to be in, and to try and have the courage to tell the sender the truth. Like my grandchild would be 6 months old now, and I really would feel very uncomfortable, at a baby shower. And not to make up the excuse that I did years ago, where I would say, oh, it's the same date as my aunt's 80th birthday party. So I'm sorry I can't come. Um, because I did do things to protect myself, but where I wasn't totally expressing, my feelings to other people.
Yeah,
So,
so important.
and
Wow.
if you can just find one person, just one person, whether it's a family member or friend that you could just confide in and just say, hey, and that's how I started out. I said, hey, I have something I really want to talk to you about that you might be surprised to hear, but I know you're really a good listener.
Yeah.
And when can we talk about this, in the next few days? Um, and it really opened the Pandora's world of goodness, because it was very, very helpful for me and validating for me to know that at my age, people were losing jobs, they were being downsized, they were learning terrible medical diagnoses. They were hearing that maybe one of their adult children was filing for divorce. And I thought what I was going through was so much smaller on the scale of all their problems that I didn't want to bring my issues up. And then I learned over time, when I learned to be comfortable enough to communicate, that people thought, and they were really not just patting me on the back, they really wanted to help, and they wanted to help me express my feelings, and they wanted to be the ear to listen and to help me navigate it. So, um, That's what I encourage people to do, not hold things in the way I held it in for too long.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important to, find that friend or therapist, like you said, to talk to. And so thank you so much. And I would love to know, Mary Ellen, if someone wants to get a hold of you, what is the best way to reach you?
Well, actually, my publisher is Inner Peace Press. This is the cover of the book.
Okay.
And Heather Fealty is the publisher owner, and she actually developed a website for myself. So it's called non-grandparent.com. Very easy. And in it is my bio background to explain my nursing career and what impetus I had to write the book. But also, the book at the end of each chapter has the references it's a heavily referenced book. I have about 60 citations. So if people want more information, they can have places to go and get it. And so on the website, she actually has all the hyperlinks. So you could actually just click on and go and search the CDC websites or the professional authors that I used for citations. Um, so that would really be the best way. And my email address is there also on the webpage. So nongrandparent.com is
Awesome. Well, we'll be sure and we'll tag you in this post so that people can find you on Facebook. And
yes,
and then we'll also put your website in the comments so that people can click right on there to go straight there. And then also just to find your book if they are hurting themselves or if they have someone, a friend or a family member who is going through this issue, because it is a big issue and it spreads out far and wide, not just people who don't have, grandchildren, but people who might have grandchildren that they can't, communicate with. So
right. And I don't want to, my mind, I'm thinking as in different directions as we speak. There's a very profound category of non-grandparents that I learned by writing my articles. I was contacted by people who lost an only child, and I don't know how old these only children were when they were lost, but they're deceased. So therefore, they pointed out to me that they'll never be a grandparent because they are no longer a parent. So I think that's such an important category. And then another category is someone with a terminal illness or an uncertain medical future who's of a certain age, and then thinks that, I'm probably not going to be around to see a grandchild because my future is like precarious. So I even include a quote from my book from Alex Trebek. Before he passed away, he was interviewed by a Canadian reporter, Lisa Laflamme, her name was, on a YouTube I found. And he was sick during the interview, and she said, "You've accomplished so much in your life. Like, do you have any regrets?" And he paused for a second and he said, "Well, if I pass before I have a grandchild, that might bother me." And I was really like taken aback by that because I thought, it just shows you like so many people that like I don't know Alex Trebek like personally, but I think a lot of us knew him just because he was in our living room every
yeah,
evening if we watched Jeopardy. And I think that it just goes to show you can look at people, you can know them for friends, family members, coworkers, and you just don't really know anybody's burden because people do keep their sorrow to themselves. So I think too, if my book just helps people from whatever sorrow they're carrying, learn some strategies to talk about it, and also some self-care strategies, because I have those also in the end of the book. I think to me, that would just make my goal met if I feel like I helped a certain percentage of that population.
absolutely. Well, I'm sure you will. And I'm glad that you came on and shared your story and your insights, Mary Ellen. And I just want to thank you for, being you and doing the work. And then also just sharing with us here at the Be Awesome Network what we can do to either help other people or help ourselves in this situation.
And I actually want to tell you because I've not listened, of course, to all your videos, but I've listened to so many of them. And you do create such a beautiful, embracing community. You make people feel very comfortable with their discussions with you. But also, as a public health nurse, I really think you're doing such a valuable service to like the nation and the global
Mhm.
community because you're bringing things to light and informing people and inspiring people to learn more about so many different topics that they might have felt that they were alone in their journey, and then they listen to a video and or watch a video and know that they're not alone, and they deserve, their feelings are worthy and they deserve to be validated. So I thank you for what you're doing for public health.
Thank you so much for saying that. It's amazing to hear. So I would love, Mary Ellen, for you to just give us some final thoughts before we end our time today, and then we'll say goodbye. But it's just been an amazing time listening to all of what you had to share, and I'm really thankful that we got to meet.
Oh, I'm thankful too. Well, I guess one thing that I can say in ending, and again, I have this in the book, but it's kind of like my full circle, is I talk about a little sign that I purchased probably 15 years ago that I had hanging in my office. And then when I retired, I brought it home. And it's just a little oval sign and it says, do one thing every day that makes you happy. And I think that that's what we have to do, like just at the end of every day to think, oh, what did I do today that made me happy? And it doesn't have to be some big grandiose, project. It can just be the fact that, you had 2 minutes to sit and meditate before you started your day, or you practiced a new yoga move, or
Yeah.
you helped the elderly person in the grocery store pull down that item from the top shelf that they couldn't reach. Just it doesn't have to be something big, but that's what I try and do. One thing every day that makes me happy. So I encourage others to do the same.
I love that. That's great advice, Mary Ellen. Well, thank you again for being with us today. And I want to tell everyone who's watching, thank you for being with us. It means a lot that you would be here and learn with us and grow with us. And I also want to remind you that you are awesome and you can do things like write a book like Mary Ellen did. And when we share our stories with each other, we help lift and inspire each other to do the things that we really want to do. And so, thank you, Mary Ellen, for being with us and encouraging us in that way.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish you everything well.
Thank you so much. And thanks for joining, guys. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.